I don't know what to do with that. Okay. So that's how intensity is coded: a relative increase or decrease in the rate at which the neurons fire. Oh, all of a sudden, my cold neurons or heat neurons are firing less. It must be getting colder. Furthermore, relativity operates to calibrate our sensations. For example, if you place one hand in hot water and the other in ice water for some time before immersing them both in a lukewarm water, you will experience conflicting sensations of temperature because of the relative change in the receptors registering hot and cold. Although both hands are now in the same water, one feels that it is colder, the one that was in hot water, and the other feels warmer because of the relative change from prior experience. This process, called adaptation, is one of the organizing principles operating throughout the central nervous system, and that also has to be an important consideration in methods. It explains why you can't see well inside a dark room if you have come in from a sunny day. Your eyes have to become accustomed to the new level of luminance. Adaptation explains why apples taste sour after eating sweet chocolate and why traffic seems louder in the city if you normally live in the country. In short, all of the experiences we have are relative. That's I don't really know what to do with that. Adaptation sensitivity. Hey Neo, what's up? In fact, your sense of happiness and achievement is based on how you compare yourself to others. We just did the envy chapter of that video, which was very fun to make. In fact, your sense of happiness and achievement is based on how you compare yourself to others. O'Reilly cites the observation by the American satirist H.L. Mencken that a man is satisfied so long as he is earning more than his brother-in-law. I expect this holds true for sisters-in-law as well, because relatives are the closest individuals with whom we can compare our fortunes. Relativity also explains why people become discontented when they learn about their colleagues earn a higher salary. Industrial disputes are less about wages and more about what others in the company are earning in comparison. When we discovered what the bankers were earning during the recent financial crisis, this was written in 2012, the general public was outraged. The bankers could not see the problem with their high salaries and bonuses because they were comparing themselves to other bankers who were prospering. Section, remembered selves. If relativity is all that we can ever know, then this means that our self is defined by the values against which it is matched. Even our remembered self, what we were like in the past, is a relative decision. Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman similarly draws the distinction between two different versions of the self: the experiencing self and the remembered self. The experiencing self is the subjective experience of conscious awareness living in the present. Kahneman thinks we all have such moments of the experiencing self that last on average for about 3 seconds. Uh, he estimates that we have about 600,000 such moments in a month and 600 million in a lifetime. But once these moments have passed, they are lost forever. Right? No record is kept. My experiencing self are the its that are engaging with my present moment right now. The treatment of what I'm currently looking at, knowing that I am a person, that I am here, blah blah blah, experiencing, goes away Can't last that long. We think we're conscious and stuff. We get like three moments, 3 seconds of consciousness. We got tons of them, but we can't really hold on to it that long. We don't do it that long. Then other processes start happening. You can't. It's exhausting to more you engage with, the more processes engage with each other. I mean, that's just more communication, which is more energy used. So the moments of the experiencing self, whoa, those are processes engaging quite globally with sensorial interpretation processes. And that's going to be a completely different system from the remembered self. So let's say you take it, this experiencing self, let's say you experience the self. So the experiencing self is experiencing the self and experiencing the things. So that's going to be very limited. You're not going to be able to describe it much. You're not even going to really experience that much, but a little bit. But now when the experiencing self is experiencing the remembered self, the construction of an image, that's a different process, which has different results. And that's why there's no single operator and no single observer. This is our single observer myth in the Warsaw Illusions. Gosh, look where I am. And I have all this to myself. I mean, right now, not all the time. Sometimes it's like one other car. So Neil's, 100 meters away now. 150 meters away now. And I'd be able to just chill. Love this spot. Love it. Alright. Now I'm going to feel so fucking dumb for all this chit-chatting I've been doing. Alright, let's go. And so they are lost forever. That's not part of the remembered self system. The experience doesn't get saved as part of the self. Is that what we're saying? Is that what we're saying? In contrast, the remembered self is our memory of our past experiencing self. So that's not what we were saying. No. So they are part of the same system. Gotcha. They're just different parts, but of the same system. So still not a single operator. But also, I think there are going to be some pretty important differences in the systems. In contrast, the remembered self is our memory of our past experiencing self. Okay, I can't disagree. We're defining terms right now. If that's what you tell me the remembered self is, that's what it is. Okay, the remembered self is our memory of our past experiencing self. So I remember I was looking at it. Is that what we're talking about? These moments are integrated into a story that we keep in memory. However, as discussed, human memory is not etched in stone, but rather is actively constructed as a story that is retold. This story is a relative one. For example, in a series of studies looking at the pain association with colonoscopy, Kahneman and colleague asked patients to report their experiences every 60 seconds. This was the experiencing self, the moments of self-awareness that constitute the conscious moments of everyday experience. If we're ever going to use that word, we can use it for the 3 seconds of self-awareness, meaning awareness of self, meaning mechanisms engaging with mechanisms. Yeah. So, all right. So every 60 seconds, what's your pain level? All right. Kahneman was interested in how patients would recall unpleasant experiences. Oh, peak end rule. Kahneman was interested in how patients would recall unpleasant experiences that either ended abruptly in pain or mild discomfort. In half of the group, the tip of the colonoscope had a blade on it. I was joking. In half of the group, the tip of the colonoscope was left in their rectums for 3 minutes, which lengthened the duration of the procedure, but meant that the final moments were less painful. It's getting pulled out slowly, I guess. After the colonoscopy, patients were asked to rate their experiences. The group who had the longer procedure that ended in less pain rated their experiences more positively than the group who had a shorter procedure. The relatively painless ending left a lasting impression, because that's how we're calibrated. That's the weight. We give a lot of weight to the end, and also the peak, but I guess that's coming to the end Um, so again, we're not reasonable. Our calibrations are imperfect. The way our mind works is we disproportionately use the end for the whole procedure, but also the peak. Because I bet even if you had, so let's say for some they pulled out quite quickly and it was quite painful. Let's say during the procedure for the others who had the painless ending, they still had a moment equally as painful, but during the procedure. But then they had a nice end. So whether that moment was in the middle or at the end makes a huge difference, is my point. Even if you still have that moment. Oh, and the recency effect. It would appear that we are more sensitive to the beginnings and endings of experience and remember them rather than what goes on in between. This has been shown in hundreds of memory experiments in which individuals are asked to remember long lists of items. It turns out that we are more likely to remember items at the beginning of the list, called the primacy effect, and items at the end, called the recency effect. It's not that we get bored in between, but rather the items at the start have the relative advantage of novelty, and items at the end are less likely to be forgotten because subsequent items do not overwrite them in memory. In short, the beginning and end demarcate the duration of the experience, which is what we note. What? That's not what you were talking about, is it? Yeah, well, we note the beginning and end, but we don't note the duration because then they would have said, oh, that was a longer procedure, that sucked. This is why it is always better to be either the first or the last to be interviewed for a job, because the first and the last candidate benefit from primacy and recency effects. These effects of being, and so then if we had critical recognition, hiring procedures would work like this. Let's say you got 3 people. Oh, damn. Oh, okay, you got 3 people. They watch an interview. It's the first one they've watched of the day. One of them leaves and is replaced by someone else. The second interview, 2 people have, maybe think about that first interview because of the primacy effect. But the third person that's been added is going to have the primacy effect for the second one. Then for the third interview, you take out one of the guys that's been there since the beginning, replace him. And so you're rotating and therefore sort of controlling for the primacy effect. Hey Neo, can you come here, bud? I'm gonna stop in a second. Look, 54 minutes. When I get to an hour, I'll stop. Okay. In short, the beginning and end demarcate the duration of the experience, which is what we know. This is why it is always better, blah, blah, primacy and recency. These effects of being at the beginning or the end of an experience show that we are more sensitive to the relative changes in our lives. Oh, and also you can say adaptation happens during. Kahneman argues that these effects explain why we are so poor at evaluating ourselves during periods of stability in our lives. For example, we think that we are happier on vacations, but in reality, most of us are happier at work. Because everything is relative, we focus on transitions in life rather than on the continuities where there is little change. Right, I've been working, and now I'm here on the beach chilling. I'm happy. Look, this has been a relative improvement. But if somebody asks me every evening, what's your happiness level? What's your happiness level? What's your happiness level? What's your happiness level? Okay, if we don't have absolute value, then we're just assuming that it's relative to some constant. Every day it's always relative to the same thing. But well, how can you do an experiment and ask people their happiness? I never understood that. Now I understand even less because if you say that we don't have absolute values, it's always relative, and there's always adaptation. Uh, so what we could do is you could do moments of displeasure. That's what you do. How many moments of displeasure? And yes, it'll be relative how you rate the intensity of the moment. But if you ask right after, it'll always be relative to the once they return to their baseline. Yes, the baseline is sometimes different, but maybe it'll average out whatever differences. So then if you measure happiness according to the number and intensity of displeasurable moments experienced. It's not that, oh no. Section Hotheads. External events influence our choices in ways that seem to be somewhat out of our control. But what of the internal conflicts inside our heads? The self is a constructed web of interacting influences competing for control. We're just contributing to each other. To live our lives in society, we need to inhibit or suppress disruptive impulses, thoughts, and urges. The drives of fleeing, fighting, feeding, and fornicating are constantly vying for attention in situations when they are not appropriate, when they are malice. What of our reasoning and control when we submit to these urges? It turns out that the self story we tell ourselves can become radically distorted. In what? All right, we need to learn how to pronounce O'Reilly. It's not gonna be like O'Reilly or something, is it? All right, whatever. I've said that, so it's on the record that if I sound like a fucking idiot, that I also heard it. So maybe I'm not so stupid. There. In must be one of the most controversial studies of late, Dan O'Reilly wanted to investigate how our attitudes change when we are sexually aroused. Oh yeah, use some points. All of a sudden, and you can check. You're all of a sudden you're clicking on stuff that you would never click on, and right now it feels like, yeah, sure, that. First, First, he asked male students to rate their attitudes to a variety of issues related to sex. For example, would they engage in unprotected sex, spanking, group sex, and sex with animals? Would they have sex with someone they did not like or with a woman over 60? He even asked them whether they would consider spiking a woman's drink with drugs so that she would have sex with them. In the cold light of day, these men answered absolutely no way they would engage in these immoral acts. These were upstanding males who valued women and had standards of behavior that they had adopted from their culture. O'Reilly then gave them $10, a copy of Playboy magazine, and a computer laptop protectively wrapped so that they could answer the same questions again with one hand while they masturbated with the other in the privacy of their dorm rooms. When they were sexually aroused, this is a Playboy magazine. When they were sexually aroused, something monstrous happened. These men returned into animals by their passion. O'Reilly discovered these student Dr. Jekylls turned into veritable Mr. Hydes when left alone to pleasure themselves. They were twice as likely to say they would engage in dubious sexual activities when they were sexually aroused. And it's like, because it's such a strong effect that even though you're like, would I admit to this? But just like, yeah, fuck, that's true. They were twice as likely to say that they would engage in dubious sexual activities when they were sexually aroused. More worrying, there was a fourfold increase in the likelihood that they would drug a woman for sex. The expressed likelihood. Clearly, when males are thinking with their little brain, his quotes, they tumble from their moral high ground, which they can usually maintain when they're in a non-rest state. If we had critical recognition, the people I volunteered with, they were surprised every time one of these little activist hippies, progressive, whatever types, sexually assaulted someone. What? They wouldn't even be able to fathom that the women were doing it too. And they're just, you would think that they would know better. That's because you have no critical recognition. As O'Reilly put it, prevention, protection, conservatism, and morality disappear completely from their radar screen. It was as if they were a different. I'm finishing up. You're so right, Fly. That's so funny. All right. It was as if they were a different person. All right. I did think we're done today. Okay. I need my meds. 2024 Akbar 23 Delhi 1948. Listen, I had to stop well before the sun sets so I can get a chance to give my phone a full charge. One, what was the whole individual cases thing? I mean, I get that we don't have great processing power. So it's hard to think about trends and populations and stats and all that stuff. And so it's better for just the immediacy of an individual case. But what were the implications of that for him? The other thing is, what were the implications of that for him? That was several pages ago. The other problem with probability is that humans have not evolved to consider likelihood based on large amounts of data. That's just a processing issue. We focus on the task as relevant to ourselves and how it applies to an individual basis rather than. I don't know where that was going or where that's going yet. Okay. So, section, we are what we have. What was the other thing I was going to say? At one point I was going to say, you can just read the book and then, listen to these videos after you've read it. In case you're like, hey, yo, how can I keep track of anything when you keep interrupting everything with a speech? Oh, hey, sorry. So we are what we have. Remember Timothy Wilson's essay, we are what we do. We are what we have. It's not just our natural desires that are susceptible to impulsivity. To that list, we need to add the modern pastime of shopping. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So long as the system is not, as long as the processor is not in a closed system, predictable input that's already been calibrated to treat, it's impossible to have reason. Now, it's not, and then, now, yeah, if it's in a closed system, okay, it's not impossible, but we're not in a closed system, and also, it would be possible, but still, what reason do you think that our mechanism would be perfectly fine tuned to even those inputs that we know? Okay, shopping. So it's not just our natural drives that are susceptible to impulsivity. To that list, we need to add the modern pastime of shopping. Shopping has no obvious evolutionary imperative, and yet in the West, it is often reported as an addictive behavior. There are even Shopaholics Anonymous groups similar to the more established Alcoholics Anonymous to help people, Neil, come here, to help people overcome their psychological need to buy things. I am not personally a shopaholic, but I have occasionally made that impulsive purchase that I would not normally make, very often egged on by others. In my case, these have been esoteric objects or art that I think I should own. But why? What is it about owning possessions that gives us a psychological buzz? Neo, come here. Did my dog go deaf? Hurry up. All right, couche. All right. I think that objects are a reflection of ourself, or at least a perceived notion of how we would like to be seen by others. William James, one of the first psychologists to understand the importance of objects to humans as a reflection of their notion of self, William James was one of the first psychologists to understand the importance of objects to humans as a reflection of their notion of self when he wrote, "A man's self is the sum total of all that he can call his, not only his body and his psychic powers, but his clothes and his house, his wife and children, his ancestors and friends, his reputation and works, his land and horses and yacht and bank account." Objects serve as an important function as ostensive markers for self-identity. When we take possession of objects, they become mine, my coffee cup, my Nikes, my telephone. This obsession with ownership can be traced to early childhood. In our labs, we found that many preschoolers had formed an emotional attachment to sentimental objects such as blankets and teddy bears and would not readily accept an identical replacement. Many of these children would grow up into adults who would become emotionally distressed just at the thought of destroying their beloved rag bag. We know this because we wired adults up to a machine that measures arousal and found that they got anxious when they had to cut up a photograph of the object of their childhood attachment. Myself and colleagues have recently created a series of brain imaging studies in which we show adults videos of their objects being blown up, driven over, axed, chainsawed, and jumped on. A brain scanner reveals the different regions of the brain that are activated during these distressing movies. So far, the results look encouraging. Sometimes I really love my research. What do you mean they look encouraging? Neuroscientists Neil McRae and Dave Turk have been looking at what happens in the brain when objects become ours. The change of ownership from any object to my object registers in the brain as enhanced activity. In particular, there is a spike of brain activity called a P300, which occurs 300 milliseconds after you register something of importance. It's a wake-up call signal in the brain. When something becomes mine, I pay more attention to it in comparison to an identical object that is not mine. This process is fairly automatic. We gotta learn about what P300 is and how general specific this term is. Is the 300 because of the 300 milliseconds, or is that just a coincidence? It's a wake-up call signal in the brain. Every P300 is? In one study, so when something becomes mine, I pay more attention to it. This P300 thing happens. Okay, paying attention to this thing. Enhanced activity. This process is fairly automatic. In one study, participants observed as particular products were divided into two shopping baskets, one for them and one for the experimenter. Their P300 signals revealed that they paid more attention to things that were theirs. After sorting, deodorant, experimenter, toothpaste, subject, notepad, subject. Okay, toothpaste, notepad, they were paying attention to that. And we had talked about that earlier in the book, sort of. Something about that. After sorting, participants remembered more of the items placed in their own basket compared to the experimenter's basket, even though they were not instructed that there was going to be a memory test. You want an extra challenge? If this video is boring for you, you know all this stuff. You watch my videos. And this P300 is very interesting. All right. But also an additional challenge. Sometimes we hear about an experiment, it tells us something, and we'll dismiss it. We won't pursue the implications because, like, oh, of course. But that, of course, is about familiarity. Oh, we know people pay attention to themselves. Okay, so we're not surprised when people pay attention to themselves. But there's still, I think, more to be taken from what this is specifically telling us about that fact, what it's revealing to us about that fact. Just because we know a fact, and a fact is familiar, doesn't mean we need to P negative 300, right? And so you're going to find yourself, oh yeah, well, that experiment, any experiment that doesn't surprise you, okay, that's okay. But know that you might not be engaging with it because it doesn't surprise you. So we have to try to engage with it nonetheless. And that's something that I have to try to do or figure out ways to do. So don't look away just because it's familiar. Because of course we know novel stimuli get more attention, and novel stimuli that are ours. All right, well, I'm talking about your mind right now. I'm talking about you. And this experiment is novel. Even if there's some aspect of it, people pay more attention to themselves, it isn't novel. Don't let that will spill into your evaluation of whether there's a takeaway from the whole thing. Remember that. So let's get in it. It's in there. And it's like, all right, hold on, let me just run through this experiment in my mind real quick anyway. Just make sure you can explain it, and then you can move on. After sorting, participants remembered more of the items placed in their own basket compared to the experimenter's basket. And by the way, what it means is not just, oh, they care about themselves, but in the processing, all right, whatever. All right. After sorting, participants remembered more of the items placed in their own basket compared to the experimenter's basket, even though they were not instructed that there was going to be a memory test. This is because, as James said, part of who we are is defined by our material possessions. Right, because we are constantly updating. So we are looking around. Hey, who am I? We don't feel like we've just woken up like, oh, I have no idea who I am. But that is what is happening. You are constantly constructing your sense of self. Constantly. Anything new that can be used as part of that self, or that seems relevant to the self, let's bring it in. I mean, I have obviously changed enormously. And probably in ways that I can't appreciate. I mean, this mullet, my clothes and stuff. I look around. Oh, I'm a camper guy. Okay, gotcha. Oh, I'm a philosopher. I've got constant reminders of that. Oh, okay, gotcha. I'm doing shit. Oh, okay, gotcha. And then my hair, my goggles are sort of my part of my reminder that I'm just not wearing the everyday uniform. So then when I am confronted with everyday normal people expectations and stuff, I don't even really process them, because even when I'm hearing those expectations, I'm also seeing in a mirror over there how I look. And my brain's just going, oh, no, okay, that's not for me based on this information. Because there isn't this permanent